Morning. Hi, Tina. Fine, how are you?
Great, thank you.
We'll have Casey and Jason and Greg and Isan come to join Jeff. And today we're taking up a ZTA that I introduced with Craig Rice. And it is a follow-up to our recent work around farm alcohol production. And during that process, we had two brothers come in who wanted to open a farm brewery. And we didn't want to open up that ZTA to the residential zones at that time. We just felt like it was, unpredictable, and we thought it made sense to separate it out and just treat it by itself so we could make sure we didn't, frankly, derail what seemed to be a delicate conversation. So now we are here today.
Right.
Are the brothers here? No? All right.
Yeah. Okay. When last we left farm alcohol production, I sound like I'm in an echo chamber. We had allowed the use where we previously allowed wineries, which were the agricultural zones and the large lot zones. So it was not a limited or conditional use in the RE1 and RE2 zones. RE1 and RE2 are a little bit different than those other zones. Those other zones all promote agriculture in their intent. In the RE1 and RE2, it's strictly residential. It says the intent of these zones is to provide designated areas of the county for large lot residential uses. The predominant use is residential in a detached house. That's what it says as an intent. The other ones say that they are agriculturally based. Agriculture is allowed in the zone now. You can farm in the zone. We do have agriculturally assessed land in the zone. The criteria that was put forward to sort of limit this so that it wasn't allowed on every residential lot in the RE1 zone was that it be at least 25 acres in size, and that it be agriculturally assessed. Park and Planning, I thank them for their good work on this, found that attached to 20 properties. We added one other criteria to that is that it must be in water and sewer category 6, which means septic. And one of the reasons for that is that there are no physical limits to how big this could be as a use. There's no maximum FAR or any other of those criteria that you would have for a commercial zone. So by putting it in category 6, you assure that which is septic, you assure that it would not be Coors Brewery coming in the RE1 or RE2 zone. You just can't do that on septic. So those were the criteria. They found 19 then, only one, only the site over on the Potomac side over here was in sewer category 3, and that was it. One of the concerns I had when you look at the site, number one, there's sort of an East County bias to this. Most of these sites are east of I-270. Let me click on the zones here, well, at least RE1. You can see the RE1 and RE2 are the purple. Oh, that's too far out. Have to go back in a little bit. Now, there's an interesting pattern and an interesting reason for where these locations are. They're really on both sides of the developed area of the county. This was sort of this was the Van Allen belt for the for the agricultural areas. There was an area of residential to separate agricultural from really high-density residential areas. So this requires either 1 acre or 2 acre lots. The ag zone allowed 25.
So these require 1 or 2 acre minimum lot size.
That's correct.
Such as it's mansion zoning as well as rural zoning.
We like
Depends on which side of the county.
Yeah, exactly. It depends which side of the equity issue you're on that one, and I don't know how to play that right now. But certainly, it is not where you would find affordable housing.
Well, unless you're on the more rural side of the county, right, or something like that.
Oh, trust me, these are premier acreages in the county.
Yeah.
My concern when I looked at this is that there were some of these sites, and I'll try to zoom in on one here, that were really just accessed off of secondary streets. Here's one that's off of a cul-de-sac right now as its only real access point.
Now, can you show us the satellite view on that one?
I can. And then let me take off I'll take off the zones on top of it so you can see. So that's almost a completely treed area. I have no idea why they have the agricultural assessment, but they do. So in my view, viewing that the intent of these zones was not agricultural, we view this use as an accessory to agriculture.
So that property there, looks like they're farming a piece of it. A fair amount of it is in some type of.
I don't know. It looks like it's cleared. It looks like dirt to me. Let me take off the.
It's been.
I don't know what is going on up there, and I don't pretend to. It looks plowed.
Yeah, it's fine.
But in any event, if it gets to a farm alcohol use, it's got to get out of there.
Yeah. Okay.
So I had a recommendation in the alternative. Number one, either make this a conditional use, and that way they'd have to show that it didn't adversely affect its neighbors, or make this the access to the property be at least be greater than a secondary primary.
So just to pause so if they're plowing those fields, they got to get equipment in and out of there. So presumably they're using that same cul-de-sac today.
Yeah, but how?
Through the property.
I don't.
Actually, no. Maybe they're coming in. From another
Right. They
location.
might be coming in from this side.
Yeah, they're probably coming in from over there, and then they cross over.
Right, and it looks like there is the place to do that.
Right.
Yeah, right there.
Whereas if you never know how they would configure, but they would have the right if they.
Yeah, if you had the point of access touching to a secondary residential road, let me turn on that property link again. They touch right there. They have access to that. I think that's a problem.
Okay.
So I put forward those alternatives. The other thing,
Can you show us all the properties that with your second alternative, not the special exception one, but the
I did not
okay, that's fine.
single those out. I think the property that these brothers were interested is on a more significant road than a secondary. Now I forgot. It's 5,000.
Only ladies.
Only Laytonsville Road. That's a pretty substantial road. So they wouldn't have a problem. My suggestion would eliminate 5 of these properties.
Okay. Planning, TPS, any general comments? Any comments on Jeff's recommendation for the just the tweaking it to only allow it from the larger roads?
Well, the planning board's view was that some development standards might be an appropriate way to constrain the places where this kind of use could be located, and the use of the septic restriction is one way to do that. What Jeff has suggested about the access from a primary road, that's another way to do it. You could think of others. You could think of lot coverage requirements or setbacks or those sort of things to make sure that where the site, how the site is developed, that it doesn't create compatibility problems with the budding uses. Now, when you're talking about a 25-acre piece of land, you have some room to work with, so maybe there's ways to ensure that any structures on the site or other places where people are going to be congregating or doing business are well away from the edge of the property where they might bother the neighbors. We were very concerned not to make this conditional use, because once you're in the conditional use process, you're talking about quite a lot of uncertainty as well as expense in hiring lawyers and engineers and others to try to make the case that you should be allowed to do this. And so we thought that if you really want to encourage this kind of use, you should create some certainty with some development standards rather than kick it into a hearing examiner process. I think that's the long and short of it.
Yeah, and before I turn to Andrew, when we did the ag reserve zone allowance for this, we put in some issues like a setback requirement, and those are also in this. So that's an important thing for folks to remember.
That was going to be my, I was going to ask. Sorry, that was going to be my question. I was going to ask if the existing setback requirements would also conform to this, and that answers my question. I think.
Right, they do. The existing requirement is 100 feet from an existing building in terms of setback. If you wanted to make that more restrictive, you would do 100 feet from a property line. And again, because this is a residential zone as opposed to an agricultural zone, you might consider that as well as what I suggested.
Well, we didn't do that in the last one because there were some existing examples, I think, that would have been inconsistent with that. I'm not sure that it matters here, but District 1 council members think alike because this was your predecessor's amendment, as I recall. Okay, great. Well, I'm inclined to support your road related refinement, but not the special acceptance requirement.
Right, and just again for our new council members' benefit, conditional use in this case would cost well for wineries the application fee was $8,200. The time period would be 6-8 months to go through the approval process. I did forward to the chair the whole process that would have to be gone through to get that. It is a thorough process, and one of the reasons for that is it is somewhat out of character to the predominant use in the zone. So that's why it was there, but I understand the chairman's sentiments here.
Well, I think the philosophical issues are important. I mean, residential is supposed to be to promote housing, and in a sense, we're taking some housing opportunity away by allowing this use in the residential zone, although we're only doing it in large lot zones, which probably there's some other issues there we ought to be thinking about. So I think the ambivalences extend in different directions. All right.
So you mentioned the 100 setback. I mean, I'm inclined to have some conformity if we, for the prior ag reserve bill.
So
and
leave it
Currently conforming.
right.
So
But-
leave the setback from an existing house.
Yeah,
for
but
100.
is there any concern or issue there from the planning board? I mean, that would be my inclination for some consistency and
I
leave
don't-
it as it is.
Correct.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to express a view one way or the other. I was just suggesting that if you thought there should be more restrictions, those are the types of issues the planning board would think would make sense. where you draw that line is less
I wouldn't do
significant
it from a
than.
lot line, because what if there's an existing structure right up on the road? That's actually where you really want it to be. And so,
Yeah, we're not arguing that it should be different, just that rather than kick it into conditional use, let's come up with some standards that we can agree objectively are reasonable and approach it that way.
Right, and these are large property. I mean, these are not small so I have less of a concern than I would with, other zones where you're talking about huge properties and wanting to have some break from the property, so I don't see it as that big of an issue. I just wanted to make sure, because it was raised, that, but I'm inclined to agree with you that let's keep it consistent with what we currently have.
okay.
In the ag reserve.
2-0 on, with the amendment. Terrific, thank you so much. Thanks for being here for this conversation. Now we will move to our next item. Lana? If planning wants to stick around for this conversation, we'll invite if your name's on the packet, come on up.
We have the second line, it's like hockey.
Exactly, right.
Which one's the shutdown line?
This is the one coming in.
Yeah. This is the offense line. That was the defensive shutdown line. I think the planning board, Jeff.
Come on down this way. Tina, come on up. Judy, where's Judy? Is Judy here?
Yeah, she's tied up over at the chamber.
Okay. There was a good discussion this morning at the chamber on the government
Yeah, I was
sector.
there. That's
Was it
where I
good?
came from. Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah. I want to
Well,
see
it
if we
was
can.
federal contracting and then also the shutdown, but it was kind of the broad picture of what federal contracting looks like in Maryland and Montgomery County, and then some potential impacts. Although it's really too early to tell what the impacts would be. But
I'd like to get them in here to share some of that data.
yeah, I think it was interesting.
All right, so we've got Rick Lou, and I'm guessing that you are Laura Shipman.
Yes.
All right. Hi, Laura. And Tina and Sarah. Jean. And right. I was going to let you kick it over to Alana.
As you said, we're going to have a briefing today on small-scale manufacturing, so Alana will go through her slides for a little bit, and then when we go to question and answer, the panel here will also be able to provide questions or answers depending on kind of their role in the process of doing small-scale manufacturing. So with that, it's your show.
Alana, this is a day we've been working toward for some time.
For some time.
All right, so I'm glad you're here, and let's hear from you now.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to get to share this information with you and with the rest of the community. Just by way of introduction, my name is Ilana Prus. I'm the CEO of a company called Recast City, and I work with communities to bring small-scale manufacturing back into neighborhoods and into downtowns. Last year, I did a project for the county, really doing an initial set of interviews, an initial analysis to start scratching the surface about this topic for the county, for Montgomery County. So, what did I do?
I don't know.
Is it not coming up as,
It's a PDF.
yeah.
I would just scroll.
Oh, scroll, there we go. Oh, that's, okay. So, like I said, this is considered a starting point. And it's in fact a challenge that a lot of communities are facing. So a lot of communities are saying, we want to diversify our economy, we want to make great places, and they recognize that there are a number of things that have been in the way. I'm going to talk about those issues really briefly first to make sure we're all on the same page where we're starting, and then I'm going to dive into the details of what we found in this analysis for the county. So first thing we found, and this is true in pretty much every community across the country, is we spread retail like peanut butter. We said we want it everywhere. We have it along roads. We have it in malls. We have it in mixed use. We have it in a lot of places. Our county is actually doing okay in terms of retail right now from the analysis that the Office of Planning did a couple years ago. But this is a nationwide issue. We also have a lot of places that are dependent on one sector. So we have a lot of dependency on federal government. Other communities are very dependent on tourism. Tourism in particular has a ton of low-wage jobs. So diversifying our economies becomes really important.
When you said that this is a nationwide issue, you mean the dynamics impacting retail
Correct.
and
Right.
it's being rocked by so much change.
It's being rocked by so much change in terms of what retail looks like, and also that we have so much of it in places that weren't necessarily meant to be retail in the first
Essentially
place.
overzoned for.
Correct. Right. In some ways, we've all set my smart growth background, I completely am part of this, but we said we want mixed use, and so a lot of places took that to heart and put mixed use everywhere. Right.
That if we just zoned for it, that made the market. But
Exactly. And that really feeds into this next issue, right? We have been thinking about one size fits all for a very long time, both from the strip center side as well as from this mixed use side. We haven't really thought in a lot of places about the details of the character of that place. I mean, if we think about our county, each of our neighborhoods has such distinct character and such distinct personalities. That's an amazing asset to me. And so part of the question is, as we go deeper into this question, is how are we really showcasing those personalities of place? And what you had brought up, Hans, this market change. There's so much changing in real estate right now, and in particular in retail. The real estate developers are all about experiential retail, right? It's not just having a shop, it's about what experience. And the whole development is about the experience now. And that means that some of our places that are not new development need to figure out how to create this experience, even with dispersed ownership across properties, to keep up with these market changes. We know that people are picking the place first and then finding jobs. Businesses are picking the place first, often because of the price of the space, but also whether or not they need foot traffic. Some of them need foot traffic and some of them don't. And I'm going to get into that in more detail about small scale manufacturing. So there's 4 key things that really need to be figured out. And this is having to do with the use of retail space, but also having to do with creating vibrant places overall. And we know that vibrant places are really important to a local economy because it creates this feedback loop. You want to be in that place, you spend money in that place, it attracts more businesses and more people to that place. And we know that this is a huge part of our economy we need to keep building on. So we need to increase the diversity of tenant types. We need to find new users for older buildings, which is actually an enormous opportunity for us in this county. We need to bring people out for events and ways to interact with the businesses. This is part of the experience. And we need to grow locally owned businesses with good paying jobs. And I'm going to come back to that issue in terms of good paying jobs in just a second. Right? And it's not actually that easy. So the reason I focus on small scale manufacturing, and I didn't tell you much about my background for people who don't know me, 20 years of experience in community redevelopment and smart growth. I focus only on the role of small scale manufacturing in all of this because they have not been part of the conversation before. But small scale manufacturing is any kind of business that produces a tangible good that can be packaged or replicated. So if you think about a bakery who's just selling on site, not necessarily small scale manufacturing. If they're packaging up goods and selling them wholesale to neighboring stores, that's small scale manufacturing. If we think about a 3D printing widget, that can be small scale manufacturing. If we think about somebody who's doing textile handbag creation, they might be doing 5 of them in a day, they might be doing 500 in a day. That can all be small scale manufacturing. It's really based on the size of the business and how they fit into our neighborhoods, both industrial and commercial. So they create a reason for people to gather. They actually are incredibly strong at helping us build inclusive business communities. We have business owners across every different demographic population in our community that are part of small scale manufacturing. They are incredibly good at filling storefronts because they do not depend on foot traffic, but they help draw it out to a place when they are a consumer product in particular. And they increase property values because they are creating that foot traffic. They are creating that vibrancy in a storefront. This one's actually in DC. This is Zeke's Coffee. They have a coffee shop in the front, and they do their roasting in the back. And they ship out their wholesale from the basement, right? That is a whole bunch of amazing uses on a block that needed a lot of energy, and that coffee shop has made a huge difference now. And this obviously helps attract more business owners. So Montgomery County, what's going on here? We have a really interesting set of businesses here. And as I said, I scratched the surface on this for this analysis. This is the owner of Shea Cavito. She makes clothing. She's textile design and production. She uses African materials and creates patterns herself. And she does it all herself.
She is amazing. My wife loves her work and has multiple items, and our kids have items, and I think I even have a tie that she made.
She is a powerhouse. She is unbelievable, and is it a great example of a full-time business, right? She makes this, she designs it, she produces it, she sells it. She actually shares a space with a couple of other retailers, producers in this shop. She has the potential to grow. Right? She is a small-scale producer who's a one-person shop who could I think, very easily become a 5 or 10-person business with the right kind of support. So that's artisan industries, maker industries. We often call them artisan businesses. Then we have businesses that are scaling in the county. There's actually an interesting number of them in the county. This picture is of Vaccaro's. If you haven't been there yet, you should stop in. It's one of the best kept secrets in the entire county, because if you stop in, you can actually buy the cannolis on site and take them home. So he's 4th generation cannoli maker. His staff hand roll every shell, and they sell wholesale all over the East Coast. They're 10 people.
East Coast.
Yes. So this is small-scale manufacturing. And he is also scaling and has all these great ideas of what he can do with the purple line coming in near him. And then we have other businesses like Xometry, also an amazing business here, that works on a distributed production model. And this means that they do some production on site, but they're actually an interesting combination of a manufacturing and a technology company, because they've created this incredibly interesting algorithm for somebody who needs something 3D printed, both additive manufacturing as well as subtractive manufacturing. If they need something created, additive means that you have nothing there and it layers something on it, it adds onto it to make a thing, a widget. Think of the 3D printing you see with the plastic coming out of it. That's additive manufacturing. They can do it with metal, they can do it with nylon resin, they can do it with all sorts of stuff. Subtractive is if I take a block of metal and I carve out of it. They do both, but the thing that's really interesting about them is they actually have created a system of over 500 manufacturers that are part of their network who have specialized tools and abilities all over the country. So most of their work goes through their algorithm and their website to these other producers who have committed to doing things up to a very specific standard.
Are they an industry leader?
Oh yeah, they are absolutely the industry leader in this distributed manufacturing model. There are a couple of other businesses trying to make it happen, but Xometry is doing things for NASA and for the airline industry, and I mean they have
Where are they?
their production spaces in Gaithersburg and their offices are in Bethesda. And they are 100 employees, right? So that's bigger to me than small-scale manufacturing. But their manufacturing shop is in an industrial area. It's got about 50 people in the industrial space. And still, most of the production is being done by these manufacturing members of this system. Oh, there you go. And they're here, right? They're ours, and you know he's a local, and they want to be here, and it's all of these are people who have super deep roots in our community. They're not going anywhere, and the potential for each of these businesses to grow is just unbelievable. And it's one of the things I find most exciting about this is those roots. And then there are two other types that we unfortunately do not have in the county right now, but I think are important assets to be considering for the future. One is a makerspace. Makerspace is where you pay a membership fee and you can use tools, or you can go take a class. We had a makerspace in Silver Spring for a number of years. That's closed. Most of the maker spaces that are surviving are nonprofits with significant public support and foundation support
You're seeing that across the country.
across the country.
So the makerspace is just not, there's not quite enough there for a profitable business.
The tools are so expensive, and to get a critical mass of members, you have to have so many different types of tools that it needs to be like, my opinion is that it needs to be like our library system. And the places that I think are doing the best are actually embedding it both in their libraries as well as in the public schools and making both of those sets of spaces open to the public. So there are great examples of that. And then there's shared production space. So the most popular one right now is shared commercial kitchens. We have those in DC, Union Kitchen, Mess Hall. They're popping up all over the country. They can start really small. You can start with 2,000 square feet in one kitchen space that gets used around the clock. Union Kitchen is now at 15,000 square feet and also does distribution and sales support and marketing support for some of their members. This is shared production space is really important because it allows businesses to establish themselves and scale before they have to invest in the capital for the tools. And this can be true for 3D printing, high-end 3D printing, for woodworking. You can look at it in specific verticals, just like in the food production industry. So what does all of this mean for Montgomery County? We did this analysis just about a year ago. And I want to just start with a snapshot of where we are as a county. Just our demographics, right? We're growing. There is no question we are growing. I'm sure you guys know that better than I do. We are an incredibly diverse county population. We are also incredibly diverse in terms of language, in terms of education, and as you guys all well know, we do have this issue that's a huge disparity between per capita income and the value of our owned homes. And this is all just stuff I pulled out of the census. So what this tells me is that there is an enormous opportunity to engage people who are both have college and graduate degrees, as well as people who do not have college degrees, to create more good-paying jobs in our county so that more people can afford the homes here and more people can become owners in our county. In the interview process, I ask people a whole bunch of questions, and this is based on user research analysis, the tools that I've created. And after the whole set of interviews, and we interviewed about 24 people for this, both people in the county government, in the nonprofit sector, service providers, as well as business owners. There were a couple of things that came out of the conversation that really were more striking. We know we have a fair amount of entrepreneurial support for local businesses. We have the small business portal, we have the small business development center in the county, and businesses are already building off of existing local talent. We are a wealthy county, and one of the great benefits of that is that wealthy members of the county buy high-end products, which makes things like handbag production actually a viable business here because of that. Very similar to San Francisco's high-end consumer products. We have a ton of holiday markets. I don't know if you went to any of them this past year, but I can't even get to all of them anymore, that we have so many of them now. And that's a huge asset because most of those holiday market vendors are local businesses. Not all of them are full-time, but if somebody is spending 2 weeks outdoors in the winter at a holiday market, they would be at the top of my list of somebody who would want to be full-time if they're not already full-time. We do already have artisan manufacturing permitted in the CRT zone.
CRN?
All the CRs.
All the CRCs, okay.
Okay, great.
CRT is the most intense, right? No.
It's the middle.
CR is the most intense. CRT. CRN.
And it's in CRN now too.
It's not an NR, right?
It is not in the employment zone.
Yeah, that's an issue.
And we have a huge number of businesses that I think, are ready to scale. And I want to come back to that scaling point in a little while. There were a number of challenges that came up in the conversations too. So one of the things that Xometry brought up in particular is technical skills. The knowledge of how to use these industrial, both additive and subtractive manufacturing machines There's just not that much talent here. And Xometry, in fact, launched and bought both machines and hired a whole crew of people because another business was going out of business. And so it has master machinists who can do subtractive manufacturing that they don't think they can ever replace. That being said, they also said to me, the tools have advanced so fast, we don't actually think we would need these skills in the next round of tools that we would buy. So it's an interesting question of skill versus the advancement of these tools. The cost of space is going through the roof in the county, in industrial and in much of the commercial space. As you guys probably know, we have fairly limited amount of industrial space in the county. There are a lot of different uses that can go into industrial space. CrossFit gyms seem to love industrial space as far as I can tell, but there are a lot of other uses that can go into our industrial space. It's what I would call rather porous, and it increases the cost of space. One of the businesses I interviewed is up to 5 employees, is bursting at the seams in an industrial space, would not be right for a community, a commercial retail space, would stay in industrial, would gladly double his employees and his space and can't afford it.
Really? Because the price of the...
Because the prices have continued to go up in industrial space in the county.
So you're on bullet 2 here.
I'm just on number 2, right.
I want to maybe I need to come back to this, but your observation about athletic uses in the industrial space, is that a concern? Do you feel like that's a misuse of the zone and it's crowding out?
Yes, I am greatly concerned about it. It's in fact, before we started, I was writing down my own top 4 of what I would do next, and that's number 4 on my list.
It's very interesting because you're cutting to the heart of the issue. I mean, when we did the White Flint 2 master plan, the owner of all that area is, he believes that the future of, he claims that he can't fill space, that he's got vacancies, but he says that, converting it slowly to athletic-based uses is how he's going to keep it going.
Right.
But
I think and we can talk about this, I think there are a number of gaps in the whole system, right? We're not giving any attention to these businesses, so they don't know that they're wanted in the county. They don't have any clear way of finding spaces that are on the small end of the spectrum because most brokers aren't interested in making the connection for small spaces. So there's a number of gaps in the whole process that are probably causing that, and I also don't know what lease rates he's asking.
it's tough, because there's also got to be a place for sports.
Yep.
And
And I think that there's a question, right, of priorities, and I come back to this again and again this is my number 1 question out of all of this, is what's the priority around this? Do we want these businesses in the county? If we do, we actually need to do something about it because the surrounding counties are actually acting on this too, pretty intensively. And I think it's a decision to make. We don't have any support for businesses that want to scale, at least that people could tell me that they were aware of. People are not very aware of the existing support programs for these businesses, even the ones that we do have. Most of these business owners feel like they're going it alone. We don't have any system of support for food entrepreneurs who want to scale, which is, I think, a huge opportunity for us. And we don't have any particular loan or financing program for these micro businesses to scale, especially for businesses that are owned by women, people of color, and immigrants, which I think is an enormous asset that we're just sitting on.
when you say micro businesses, though, you don't necessarily mean micro loans. These are larger. We have a micro loan program, but it's probably not big enough, would be my guess.
Well, and I know that the Latino Economic Development Center has great microloan program, right? They go from $500 to $500,000. A lot of people just don't know about it. So there are 4 ways of moving forward on this.
Can you talk about how
Yep.
housing costs?
Housing costs. We have high housing costs. It's expensive to live in this county, especially if you want to buy a place. And really control those costs for your household in the future. And
Does that fit into this conversation?
it's hard to live here and have a business unless you can really scale it.
If you want to create a business that's in that kind of middle band.
Right. So a lot of these businesses, small scale manufacturing employees are making 50 to 100% more than retail and service jobs. Right. So if we're thinking about how do we support more people to be able to afford housing in the county. And we know that we have a lot of high-end jobs in the county and a lot of retail and service jobs in the county. We're very bifurcated in that way. We don't have any incentives for middle-income jobs that I know of. We have a lot of incentives for high-end jobs. If that's an important segment of our economy, then that can help address the high housing costs because more people could afford it then. We also need to build more housing, but that's a different conversation. So there are 4 topics that I want to share.
It's not a different
Yep.
conversation. I mean, I asked you because it's important, right? You can't
Yes.
talk about economic development without talking about housing.
I completely agree. And I think we need more housing in the county, and you know I have a whole history
I
on
know you do.
on
That's why I'm
housing.
asking you to talk about it because
Yes.
it's integral to the conversation about economic development.
Yes.
If you have a bad policy on housing and you
Right.
don't support creating new housing, you are working against yourself on economic development.
Yes.
And so your economic development game plan isn't going to get very far without a housing game plan.
I agree, but I think we often think about only the housing side, and we don't think about how we're creating more better paying jobs in the county that aren't necessarily the tech jobs,
Absolutely.
right? And the reason I focus on these middle income jobs in production is because so few people talk about them. And I feel like we do talk about the housing. We don't have it solved. And I think we have to create more good paying jobs as a way to achieve more affordability or have more people be able to afford the housing that we do have. But I agree, we do have to build more housing as well. So the property and land use discussion is not about housing. It's in fact about this question about the use of industrial lands. This obviously needs to be updated from the original report that now artisan manufacturing can be in the general and neighborhood retail zones.
It could be in the commercial residential neighborhood zone and the commercial residential.
But it cannot be in the neighborhood retail
It's
or
not in the
general.
employment zone. It's the artisan manufacturing zone, so it's not in the whole family of employment.
So, Rick, what's the whole family of employment zone? Sorry, I'm just going to ask Rick to talk since he's at the table, and Pam, if you want to come join at the table, you're invited.
The employment zones, I think, are like, say, EOF, like employment, office, and I don't know if there's other employment zones, but
Right, there's general retail, neighborhood retail, and then the LSC zone, Pam.
life science.
Life science zone.
Right, and I think it's prohibited in that, but I think what Ilana is saying is that industrial is prohibited in the general, which is a GR, and the neighborhood retail, the NR zones. Now, commercial residential, CR, whether it's CRN, CRT, or just a general CR, artisan manufacturing is permitted in that, but I don't believe in the general retail that's
It is not
permitted.
permitted,
Yeah.
right.
Andrew.
And then light
Sorry.
industrial is permitted, it says limited use in the CR family of zones, but it's only for breweries and distilleries right now.
Right.
But artisan is allowed.
Artisans allowed, light industrial is
Right.
mainly breweries or distilleries.
Right.
So, I mean, I totally agree on the property and land use side of this, but some of this isn't necessarily land use. I mean, recruiting local producers to locate in urban districts with vacancies, totally in agreement. But, I mean, I have some other broader questions of like what our county strategy is, which is what I think the purpose of this
Right.
exercise is, which is really helpful in matching small producers with space. You know, I would add in the conversations you had before, none of which I think are actually land use specific, but are related to how do we, the kind of, not the land use, how we talk about land use in terms of, you know, what are our, you know, approved land uses for different areas and zoning, but the broader question of how are we using and utilizing the existing space that we have, which is a broader way, much broader way to look at it. But the other, you know, the workforce development side of it, of, you know, how do we train the folks to work at a Xometry or some other large or medium-sized company that require a certain set of skills, where we probably have people who are capable of doing it, but we don't have people who are trained
Right.
to do it. And what role does the county have to provide that type of training? And I'm not sure that, you know, those are, I guess that's the property use side of the property and land use, but not the land use side. But, you know, I think there's some like really broad questions that we need specifics towards of, you know, what role does the EDC have here? Is this part of the EDC's, you know, plan? That we had a really helpful discussion the other day about the strategic planning moving forward. What role do we need to do on the county council in terms of the zoning side? Maybe, you know, the NR or some other expansion to really be thinking about this.
You're cutting to the
Yeah,
chase.
so anyway, I just.
Well, I think you're absolutely, spot on in terms of the questions, right? And I do think about land use and not just from the county policy perspective, even though I can read you zoning inside and out and backwards, unfortunately. But I think about it in terms of what is our role overall in the use of the land. So in San Francisco, I'll give you an example. There's a local nonprofit called PHED. They are the sort of the grandma nonprofit of all of this stuff. One of the roles that they serve is this matchmaking. And they started doing that because they identified a gap. The city, I believe, competed a grant that PHED won. And part of the system that they've created is a way to be a commercial and industrial broker for small-scale manufacturers to find space, so that space is being used as optimally as possible given the goals of the jurisdiction, which is why I was talking about the goals originally, about what are our priorities. But yes, it's not necessarily the county council's role to recruit local producers to any of the urban districts, but then whose is it?
I mean, it just speaks to the larger, our two best assets, and we have really good assets in this regard, are people and property and land.
Yep.
And both are, property is diminishing, so we have to figure out how to repurpose it. And people are growing, and so how do we make sure that those people are properly connected? And so.
I completely agree. So the second big topic is how to incubate and incent the things that we want. And I think this is an important role for a public entity. It can be as simple as promoting information about kitchens that are willing to be shared, right? There might be kitchens that are only being used half time. They could have tenants using that space in the morning. We might have enough of that in the county to already create enough shared kitchen space that we don't need to build a new space. We have no idea. We could invest in an incubator space for production businesses, so that there is a committed, affordable space for businesses that are doing some kind of production. We could review the business incentive criteria that we have in the county to actually support middle-income jobs. Yes.
I'm just going to ask you.
By all means.
Invest in production incubator space. So that's sort of like a makerspace, basically?
Not necessarily. So there's a community development corporation in St. Louis that bought a large old industrial space and is rehabbing it just to have affordable space for production businesses. They don't provide any tools. They provide affordable space. It's just like affordable housing. It's just for production-based businesses.
All the space so that it's affordable to get started.
Right, and then you can, it can either just be that space, or as an incubator, it can also have programming. Right, it can be an epicenter for meetings about product-based businesses.
You said that's in St. Louis, that example?
Yes, it's called Brick City Makes. 80,000 square feet.
We're learning about how to buy buildings. It's not easy, but hey.
Oh,
Okay.
it's so much fun.
What's it called?
Brick City Makes.
Very interesting.
Right, and then the idea of an investment fund of varying kinds. This is something that Pittsburgh did actually to start their technology sector 20-something years ago. They created an investment fund and said, we will invest in you if you commit to staying here for 5 years. To me, this is the number one reason that Pittsburgh actually has a super strong tech base, is because they created that investment incentive up front. We could do the same thing for product businesses.
How big is the Pittsburgh? How big did it start at? Because I don't know if it's investment in terms of they're taking ownership shares, they're providing direct line of credit, combination of all.
Say it all again, start from the beginning there.
So Pittsburgh, 25 years ago, created an investment fund. It was actually venture capital. I don't think it
We
was.
have one of those, and our lawyers have raised a lot of questions about it.
So, and whether or not what I'm talking about should be venture capital is actually, I don't think it should be venture capital. There are a lot of different ways of investing in local businesses now. But there, and other jurisdictions have done this, they invest in the businesses with a commitment that says you will stay in this jurisdiction for X number of years and you will hire locally. I think venture capital is really risky and a hard thing to do. I don't know how much they started with as a fund. I can look that up and get that to you. And what they grew, they actually started with pulling money out of their general fund to create this thing.
But they're a VC. Pittsburgh model is a venture capital.
I believe it is. There are other jurisdictions that have actually put their money with a venture capital firm to do this. There are other examples, though, where an investment fund is doing things like revenue share, right? Because when we think about local small businesses that are not going to have an exit, like a tech business would, then how do we recoup that money? As an investment, well, a revenue share actually could be a really great way forward. And there are a whole bunch of organizations across the country that are exploring this question about investing in local business that is going to scale and is going to grow, but isn't going to be an exit like venture capital.
And I mean, the benefit of revenue sharing is that it's more long-term. I mean,
Right.
the problem with an exit is a lot of times the exit leaves, right? I mean, you get bought out and the company that buys you out isn't local, even if
Right.
the company is local. And so you build this nice business, you get an exit, you get some type of return off of that exit, but then the company largely is gone, or at least it's no longer headquartered there. And so the center, nerve system of decision making and the top jobs are no longer, the growth is not going to be local, it's going to be somewhere else.
Right. And these, as we said, are all businesses of people who have deep roots in the community, which I think is a really important piece for us to be thinking about. One more. Promote and train. So,
Can you go back up?
yeah, this one.
Create an investment fund targeted to people of color, women, and immigrant. Are we allowed to do that? How do you do that consistent with?
Many other jurisdictions have done it.
Yeah.
I don't know the legalities around it.
I mean, I was on the Maryland Small Business Development Financing Authority, which is a state entity through the
Right.
Department of Commerce. It's an independent agency, 9 members, and provides small business loans to women-owned, minority-owned
Okay.
small businesses that lack adequate access to capital. It was extended to geographic, so you could, somebody who's in the Lower Eastern Shore, which lacks adequate access to private capital, parts of Western Maryland. But so there are ways to do it. I know we're tend to be concerned about the litigation risk of having pots of money that are
Right.
targeted for specific groups, but there are
Examples.
ways to do it and examples to do it, and there's certainly precedent in Maryland to do it with
Yeah.
public dollars.
Portland has a really good one right now. And then the last one is promote and train. And I actually end on promote because it's where we need to start. These businesses need to know that the county cares that they're here. Tech knows that we care, right? It's why tech goes to a specific place. If small-scale manufacturing businesses and the jobs that they create and the energy that they create is important to the county, then they need to know that. And I imagine people are familiar with some of the Made in D.C. programming. It's very visible to the businesses in that sector. So much so that there are a number of people who live in Montgomery County, but who have their small-scale production businesses in D.C. because they said, well, the county doesn't actually want us there. So the perception of the county is one of not supporting the sector right now. So even something like finding all of the programs that we already have and purposefully promoting them to product-based businesses really visibly could make a huge difference. Promoting these businesses in any kind of tourism, EDC, any other kind of branding that we do as a piece of our community, I think would be very important. I think we have this great potential also. I've been trying to think about what niche the county should fill in this. And I think that supporting programs for businesses that want to scale could be a really interesting niche for the county, because DC has a ton of startups. And people who live in Montgomery County are settled here for the most part, right? People put down their roots and they don't pick up so quickly again, thank goodness. And I think that the businesses that people are starting who are in the county are ones that are more people are looking towards scaling in some way. And there's a huge lack nationwide of programs that help product businesses scale. Really, any non-tech business scale is a huge gap in the economic development world right now. And then the other one is the Small Scale Manufacturing Advisory Council. The mayor of Knoxville. mayor of Knoxville created a mayor's maker council now a bunch of years ago. That council is supported through staffing funded in a nonprofit, quasi-nonprofit, the Knoxville Entrepreneur Center. Does the staffing for the council. The mayor sends a representative to that meeting that happens once a month. That group has been charged with doing the branding, the promoting, the convening. All of that comes through that council, and the city puts funding behind it, but it also has this outside entity providing all the staffing support. They now have an amazing website promoting the sector, and I would say, since the mayor created this council, has become known as the place on the East Coast for these businesses, which is really interesting in terms of just the perception of, and they also have affordable space, which makes a big difference.
I'd like to get Sarah to comment on the scaling, opportunity in a moment. Just don't want to lose. There's a lot here to talk about, but she put that out there helpfully, so all I did.
I think that's it.
All right.
And then act, right? I mean, my whole point is not to write reports. My whole point is to actually do something about it. I think that if we had to pick 4 places to start, I would say make it known that small-scale manufacturing is important to the county. Clarify the business's needs, because this really just scratched the surface of understanding in detail. We want to know in detail what their needs are so that we are laser focused on the money that we spend to really fit those really specific gaps in what's out there. And I don't feel like I have enough information about that yet. I think the advisory council could make an enormous difference in the perception of it in the county, and then protecting existing industrial space for production.
I've had in my mind for several years the idea of creating a maker council, but it has always been unclear where it kind of is about STEM and youth development versus, and in fact we've had meetings on this, versus this kind of more precise economic development. And I think that's really, we need that more focused economic development conversation.
Yes.
And not have it pulled into other issues.
I think education is an enormous piece of this conversation overall, just like housing is, but it's part of this continuum, and that we have to focus on the business needs to achieve something for the businesses.
In fact, we had a meeting several years ago where we talked about this, and the result was the Maker Fund, which Dan Hoffman implemented for us, and the Coder Fund. Both great initiatives, but ended up being more focused around youth and that important arena.
Right.
As opposed to this more, again, a kind of business interaction agenda.
Right.
All right.
That's it. You guys have any
Terrific
questions?
Presentation. We'll have a
What do
dialogue
we make?
now.
Yes, these are just pretty pictures of people who make stuff.
All right. Good stuff. Well, thank you. I'm so glad we got to this point. There's so much here. I would like to turn it to maybe Sarah to share some reflections. I'm glad Tina's at the table. The county executives talked about this arena a lot, and the need to do some work here. So hopefully we'll begin to get some traction there. Sarah, what can you share with us?
Well, thank you for having us. This follows nicely, I think, with the presentation David gave to you 2 weeks ago, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago, talking about where we were in the FY19 work plan. And some of our projects that we're working on moving forward.
Right.
And you probably saw at that time that a lot of the work that we're doing has evolved from when our organization started 2 years ago, and it has even evolved since Alana and I spoke well over a year ago as an interview. So I hope that you're happy when I tell you what we've been doing, because a lot of the issues that we talked about together, we are slowly getting our bearing and thinking about the economy in kind of new ways. There's so many places to go here, but the first piece I will talk about is the scaling food manufacturing businesses. You will recall that in, I think, 2015, it was after I was gone though, the first time, the DED submitted to the county executive, and I'm not sure if it happened to county council as well, a study about the kitchen incubator, and that was a joint project between Street Sense and Union Kitchen. And so I believe the conclusion was that with a one-time public subsidy to help with the construction costs, it could be operated privately. It would not need a subsidy in the future.
Did we do that?
Did we do that?
Yeah.
We did not do that.
I thought we created the kitchen incubator. No, we just talked about it.
No, that was put on hold, and I was gone, and so I don't know. I can't speak to it fully.
Tina might know
In
where
any
the bodies
case-
are buried on this one.
No, I think that
Yeah.
it was put on hold also because of MCEDC's
Oh, yeah, if you're not on the mic.
creation and things like that.
Okay, that's right.
But so in
Okay.
any case, so
We got occupied with
we knew
creating
that,
MC.
right. And so then you have the kitchen incubator study. Shortly after that, the Food Council did a study somewhat related about a co-packing, or not a co-packing facility, but a food hub facility, right? So we are kind of like getting all of this food system stuff together. But
the
in any
table.
case, now we're here, MCEDC is here, and we have all of the information from those two studies. And what we hear time and time again from food manufacturers, oh, I should also mention the Bethesda Green, Be Green Incubator Hub, Be Green Hub. They also, without trying, happen to have a lot of startups that come there that are interested in food production as well. So what we think at MCEDC now, the issue is not necessarily commercial kitchens and spaces for startups, which seem to be happening. But if we have limited resources, we really want to look at the details on what scaling food manufacturing businesses need.
Okay,
And
so
so
you're
David,
in sync here with Alana's.
we are, I think. Yeah, we are. Yay. I know, here we are. And so I think David mentioned that we're working on the study right now. We'll have some set of results in March and then more
the
this spring
co-packing
that will
facility.
talk about the co-packing facility. And it will look at all of the companies. You know, we're really familiar with Sophia, Dress It Up Dressing, and some others, and we actually have another company that's coming, and I just texted to see, I think they're coming from Union Kitchen, but I can't be sure, and they're coming to the Twin Brook area on their own, and then they contacted us, and they, in the future, will be scaling even more, and so that's a piece where then MCEDC could help them to do that.
I have to just single out Kathy Mitchell, who's here. Her son started a food manufacturing business. Is it Bright Greens? It's called, and you can.
Yeah, Bright Greens.
But they left the county to Union Market, right? And
They did.
we got to lure them back. We got to lure them back. They're back.
Good.
Yeah, the
Good.
corporate headquarters is right on the same block as Whole Foods down in North Bethesda.
Oh,
Awesome.
great, okay.
But their manufacturing plants are all over the country.
Right.
Yep.
And
And the
so-
manufacturing is elsewhere. That's really what I was trying to get to.
And so that is something that happens. And so we are looking at this more specific kind of smaller co-packing facility. And obviously, look, if you talk about Sophia as an example, she manufactures salad dressing. And so it is not going to ever make sense for her to manufacture salad dressing she's selling in California here. But it does make sense for her to manufacture a piece of what she manufactures for the United States here.
Right.
So we're looking at that, so stay tuned. We're excited about that. I think there are a couple of other things. When we talk about, I mean, land use absolutely is an issue. And protecting our industrial land and making some of our zones more amenable to artisan manufacturing and light industrial, which is really not the industrial that we all grew up knowing. Well, if you grew up in Ohio, knowing it. Anyway, I think also, in terms of incentives and access to capital is always an issue for all of our scaling companies, no matter what, if they're manufacturers or tech or what have you. We're doing a couple of things related to that. One, we're working on a program with the Kauffman Foundation, and I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago as well. That's the Angel Resource Network, which is looking at trying to harness basically high net worth individuals in this region to help to invest in startups. And it doesn't have to be in biotech or
mentioned
whatever. It can be anything. So it could be people who are interested in helping women entrepreneurs of color, food processing, green things, whatever it is. So we're just trying to build that whole network of people to help them understand that they can, achieve certain goals and help make change happen, through their investments in small companies. So that's just a really early stage thing. But then when we talk about kind of access to capital for the growing companies and the manufacturers, we do have, the EDF program is really easy to use in many ways, and
Right.
so
And move.
move as well.
Although the issue with move in this case, and we grappled with this a little bit when we did the opening move up to breweries or distilleries, is that move is for office space. And typically we're not talking about office space, we're talking about retail space or industrial space. So I think we would need to explore allowing move to be used for industrial.
We could easily do, sorry. We could easily do what we did before and set aside a certain pot of money with the same general guidelines,
Right.
but have it be a little bit more targeted. That's easy to do.
I think the challenge, though, with MOVE, and this could be a whole separate conversation.
Which I think
is
we're going to
that
have to have, I guess.
I think we need to have it, because MOVE is awarded once someone has signed a lease.
Yeah.
And MOVE is not able to help folks who already have some type of business here.
Right.
And so in terms of growing a business that was started here, it
Well,
is not going to.
Fair enough. Fair
Yeah.
enough. I was
But
thinking about that as well. Yeah.
But EDF certainly, and so when David talked a couple weeks ago as well about our
Well,
philosophy of
it's not
incentives.
it's not just that it's when you sign a lease; it's that it has to be a first lease.
Yes.
You know, if we were to allow move to be for a new lease, if it was just bigger, for example, that would allow existing companies that are trying to expand. But it's not the EDF. The EDF is a different tool. It's not tied to you know. It's just tied to expansion.
And
But
that-
we need to look at all these incentives and
Right.
figure out how to.
Yeah, I just was curious about, what scaling looks like. I mean, one of the Bee Green, Bethesda Green was mentioned. I was there several months ago, and we had an impromptu roundtable with a number of the entrepreneurs, almost all of
Was
them.
it the last cohort?
Yeah, the last
Okay,
cohort,
yeah.
and I asked them, why are you here? What would make you stay? If your business grows, and what would not make you stay? And all the same themes we've heard are here. But one of the concerns I have with something like that is, we have these businesses that are like right on the cusp of whether or not they're going to make it or not, and they're not looking to stay here. I mean, they would if it was available to them, but that's not. They're not starting the conversation with how do I go to somewhere and find out how I can stay here. These, at least in the Bee Green, these are largely really young entrepreneurs who aren't particularly tied to Montgomery County. A lot of them don't, some of them live in Montgomery County, some of them don't, some of them live in other parts of the region, largely because of housing costs, by the way, to the chairman's point here. But our ability to reach out to them, it's not as if they're going to come to us and ask, hey, how can you help me stay in Montgomery County? And there are a lot of businesses that will do that because they have children in school and they have a mortgage and they have other things that are tying them down. But this is a group of people that they're looking for any way that they can take their idea and turn it into a real business, and they'll go anywhere. I mean, if San Francisco created an opportunity, they would hop on a plane, in a heartbeat and go to San Francisco. If New York, if Knoxville, if wherever it is, they're going to leave, and then we miss out on it. And so I guess my question would be, at what point do we call it scaling? And I don't know the answer to that, but I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on that, because I know we did talk a little bit about that and connecting them to angel investing and seeing if we can help them find space and doing all the things that you all are doing, which I think is terrific. But what are the businesses that we're looking at, and how are we targeting them, and how can we grow them to make sure that we are successful?
My specific reference to the Bee Green Hub in this conversation was related to food businesses. And so you have Sophia's there, Sugo Sauces is there, Suniva Coffee used to be there. There were others that did.
Almost all food. I mean,
The new cohort is actually a little bit different.
Was like 90%. I mean, I think there was a couple that weren't food-based or related food-based. Almost all of them, at least in the last cohort, were largely food-based. Just a large part of what they do because of their green initiative, and food-based businesses are interesting in repurposing. I mean, and then what do you consider a food-based business? So, like, one of them was coffee scrubs. It's like creating soap, out of coffee grinds, which is this really interesting thing. You have, millions of pounds of coffee grinds from all of these companies that get thrown away, and that food-based waste isn't actually waste. It actually has a ton of value, and you can repurpose it. And so, like, I would call that a food-based company, even though they're selling a product that isn't food, but it's a food waste company that's eliminating food waste. So,
I think I forgot what the question was, but
Yeah.
it was so there are companies. So, for instance, Suniva Coffee is a great example, and this was several years ago, and they've since changed their name, and I can't remember what the new name is. But they were here, and they couldn't manufacture here because they were growing so quickly. So the soap-based company, I don't know. I haven't seen their their books, and I don't know how fast they're growing, but there are certain companies definitely that are in there that want to grow, and they don't have the ability to do that here. So I think in that way it would be a case-by-case basis to see how we would participate in scaling of each of the companies. But I would say, generally speaking, and this is not just for Bethesda Green's hub, but also all of our incubators, that we need to make sure that we have very good relationships with all of those companies, because the story that you just told about people being willing to move to San Francisco is true for our tech companies and our businesses in Rockville incubator as well. So we just have to do a good job of making sure that we have good relationships with all of the companies in all of our, I would even say, shared workspaces and incubators and things like that, to always be monitoring what they need to grow here.
I want to add one thing to the conversation, and I think one of the reasons we're finding so many of these food-based businesses is because we do have the Food Council, and we've actually been organizing that business sector for a bunch of years now. And so we know who they are, they know who to reach out to. They're organized in a way that, to me, that's one subsector of small-scale manufacturing that there's tons of other people there. We just haven't done the work yet to find the rest of them.
Are you finished with your prepared response, or your response to
If you think I am, unless you have other questions.
I'd like for you to keep talking if you've got more to say, yeah. Whatever.
One other thing I would just say, site control is such a big deal. And we've talked about this a lot, and in a lot of other places that I've worked, site control is absolutely the most important thing that the government does if they want something to happen.
Controlling a site.
Yeah,
Acquiring
and
a
we just
building.
don't really do that here. And so I think that thinking about site control and thinking about how you can use an entity like the Revenue Authority to do that is something that we absolutely should think about.
And also for the businesses to own their own properties
So site
where
control, you mean
possible.
a building that is used for manufacturing, for...
Yeah, like if we want this to happen and it's too expensive for the market to have that happen, then we go in and we make it happen. And that is what then the public investment is.
Right.
So instead of having maybe investments in individual businesses to try to get them to be able to find space that's affordable,
Right.
your public investment is a structure. Yeah.
We've been working on that with the Revenue Authority towards, the grape crush facility,
Right.
which has been
Yep.
in the works for many years. But we're trying to get them to expand into malting, a step in the beer manufacturing process, so that our local growers can have their grains processed here, and then our local breweries can use it. So the model is something we're sort of starting to think about, but it's an interesting idea to say, could the Revenue Authority expand into
They certainly could, yeah.
this area as well? Why not?
And Keith was one of the people we interviewed for this.
Okay.
One other thing I would just think about in terms of space too is to think about, I know we don't generally get our hands on Rockville City things, but the Stone Street corridor is a great example of a place that they are looking at thinking about how to balance, the industrial use with bringing on more artisan manufacturing. And, MCPS owns some property on Stone Street.
Yeah.
And wouldn't that be great if we could talk with Rockville and Ready and try to think of a way to repurpose
That's interesting.
that building. And then just real quick also, we have the Montgomery brand that we had MCEDC had worked on for the Food Council.
Yep.
And we have worked, and not enough. So we have to figure out, now I don't know what the answer is to that. Someone needs to figure out how to boost the Montgomery product logo and make it be a whole
Think
marketing.
about this idea of a council, of a maker council, that is, trying to hit more of that business strata, following on the Knoxville model, leading perhaps towards a nonprofit that is owning a building somewhere, could be, making things available.
I think it's always interesting if we did the cybersecurity work group, right, when MCEDC first started, because we knew it was kind of an emerging field, but we didn't know really what that meant, but there was and we didn't know what they needed. And I think going into that, I certainly had certain thoughts about when we did this study, what would come out of it, and it was not what I thought at all. And so it absolutely always helps to have small businesses and growing businesses that are doing what you want to learn more about tell you how to do it.
Right.
And so I think that would be a great idea.
Right. Okay. So much to say here. Anything you want to add from the planning perspective?
I think you may remember our recent sector plan that was approved in 2017 was Greater Littonsville Sector Plan, and That's where on Brookville Road, Vacaro's is located, and several other small businesses and small-scale manufacturing businesses. And there, with the sector plan, we did hear loud and clear to maintain the industrial zoning, as was recommended in the report. And then on the periphery, however, because the new transit station is coming in, we did want the flexibility of the CR zone. And what was recommended is to provide perhaps an incubator space or a place for small business incubation or a maker space to help the industrial community.
That was something we called out in the master plan.
In the sector plan, it is a recommendation, yeah. And that's particularly on a county-owned property that's now a ride-on parking lot and a vacant parcel right near where the Purple Line station is. And
okay, wait.
Mhm,
Which
on Brookville
property?
Road.
Brookville Road.
Mm-hmm. So if you have Littonsville Place
Right,
and
it's
Brookville.
just past the bridge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
Exactly.
It's right across from the ride-on.
And that's
facility.
presently a parking lot. It's a surface parking lot.
It's surface
for
parking lot and a
drivers,
vacant
really.
property.
And a vacant property
Mhm.
that we own. And how did we zone that?
It was zoned CR,
CR.
so it has the flexibility for artisan manufacturing.
And okay, but that's county-owned property.
It's county-owned
Interesting. So, because I was under the impression that creating some kind of a incubator space or a maker space was part of the developers.
That was
Game
also,
plan.
there's also interest in another property. We've heard from developers in our working groups to potentially do these ground floor retail and production spaces, so artisan retail and production together. So it sounds like there is interest to expand the industrial area even into those CR mixed-use properties.
So if we were to explore that for the county's
Mm-hmm.
building, I mean, what would it be? It would be like a residential building with, a ground level
Could be.
industrial,
Could be, or it could
light
be
industrial
all commercial.
space?
It could be ground floor, incubator, and potentially office above, or it could be residential above. Depends on what the market needs would be at the time.
And there are some examples, certainly in DC, where that's happened. Sometimes I think one of the ones I'm thinking of right now is where some of the space is being used more for transitional sort of space before they get a longer-term retail tenant. I think the Shaw neighborhood has some of that where it's residential above, but they have some of if not quite sort of large-scale production uses, certainly some of these maker uses on the first floor.
Brookland Metro, the Art Walk, has
Oh, sure, yeah,
micro
of course.
spaces that are production with retail, which are a great example. My one cautionary note is that new construction is very expensive. So the only way it would then be affordable for these small producers is if it was heavily subsidized by the county, unless you go in particularly to build a low-cost space for light industrial artisan users, and then you'd go through a completely different construction model. So I would just think about construction costs and the outcomes that you're trying to seek, because mixed use is in fact cost prohibitive for the most part for artisans to be in that space.
So I'm hearing something. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm getting the wrong impression, but I'm thinking like it's sort of like one way the county could be helpful is if we had a large building space that people could set up their own shop in. I'm thinking of like the Sears building in White Oak Shopping Center. Sears went out of business. They're going to redevelop that at some point. Is it empty now? Is it
Yeah,
still Sears? Still Sears. So it's not one of the ones that will be pulled back. But let's say it was empty and it was going to sit vacant like the Burtonsville Crossing or Shopping
Giant,
Center,
yeah.
Burtonsville Shopping Center, which has been vacant now for 5 years or something like that. Is that the kind of thing where we could work out how to temporarily acquire a structure like that and then say, okay, makers, come on in and start making?
So Hans, I think you could. I think we really need a strategy.
Yeah.
This is a really interesting discussion and there's lots of points, but I think this really needs more of instead of just pinpointing something, those are good ideas. The question becomes, what's the market for this, and is the Burtonsville Shopping Center in the right location
Sure.
for where this needs to happen, or do the areas really need to be in more urban areas instead of like really not metro accessible? So I think,
Right.
one of the things I picked up on what Alana said at the very end was, we need more work.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we need. I think we need a
Kind
strategy.
of work, Tina. What do you? How does this play out?
I think it needs a strategy,
Yeah.
you know, and I think that's maybe something that EDC takes charge of
Yeah.
with all of our input,
Yeah.
looking at what really the impediments are and what the options are for, you know, what the public sector can do and what the private sector can do to work together to make this happen.
Okay.
I just, one other thing, and not to throw a total monkey wrench into this report, in this discussion, but what also strikes me is that many of the issues that we're talking about also affect technology manufacturing. Because while we're really talking about artisan type of manufacturing, we're not strong in the technology manufacturing either.
By which you mean, what is technology? Robotics
Oh,
or?
no, I'm talking about biomanufacturing even. You know, a lot of times we'll have the corporate headquarters here and we'll work with them through the R&D phase. And then when they get to the product development phase and they actually
Yeah,
have
right.
their
In
FDA
North Carolina.
approvals, they're going somewhere else. And it's the same set of issues. It's the space issues.
About the space issue.
Space issues is huge. It's the workforce that isn't trained in that technology. Again, the
Yeah.
emphasis on the manufacturing. And it's the capital. Now with tech, you know, there's some more resources through TEDCO and things like that. But again, it's the same set of issues. So it's, I'm a little not as focused on the artisan manufacturing because I'm looking at manufacturing as being broader, because I think the broader you go, the more job potential there is too.
Andrew?
Yeah, I think it's an important point, but I think that the benefit of this is that we focus so much on the technology side and the biohealth side, and that has been a focus of the states and of the counties for the last 15 or 20 years. And there's a lot of room that we need to improve on. I know the wet lab space was a particular area that has been singled out by the EDC and that David reported to us, and there's some work that is being done there. And I agree with you that we need an overall strategy, but I do think there's a value of specifically honing in on this particular area, especially because I think that the opportunities to grow in this particular area are significant to attract young entrepreneurs. I mean, you don't have to have 9 degrees to start an artisan manufacturing business that's really successful, and I think there's also an added benefit of placemaking and of making different parts of the county interesting to live in, to work in, to visit, where we just don't get that from the technology business. These are good, high-paying jobs. They can potentially blow up. I agree with you wholeheartedly that they have some of the same issues. It's a training, workforce development issue. It's a space issue, both on the commercial side and on the residential side, of how do we connect the dots here. And I think though that I'd hope that at some point from this we can get a next step and if it's the EDC, that would be great, but figure out who's responsible for taking the reins and developing this strategy, who's involved, where does everybody fill in, and then how do we take it from there. But I think you're right that the having the overall strategy, and then instead of saying, pick a building, figure out what its use is, come up with the overall strategy and then see, okay, what are the assets that we have, how much money do we want to put behind this effort, how important is it to us, and how do we do it? I mean, I personally think that there's a significant amount of opportunity on the food hub commercial kitchen where we actually publicly invest in that as infrastructure, because I think we're already doing pretty well there, and so why not double down on an asset we already have, but let's come up with the full strategy. And there are other places that are doing that, I think, to significant benefit, and I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think on the other discussion before about the ground floor, it sounds interesting to me, but to your point, I mean, I think we have a ton of space that we need to figure out how to repurpose, and I'd be less, if we're going to do public investment, I mean, the market will do what the market will do, and I'm happy for the market to maximize how much revenue we're creating and jobs, et cetera. But if we're investing public dollars into anything and subsidizing some type of behavior, I'd much rather find ways to take the dearth of light industrial space that we have in desirable areas like park lawn, which is very close to, and capitalize on that rather than, take county facilities and repurpose the first floor for it, because I think the market will allow something else to happen there that we can make money off of. So my view would just be, I love the idea of a strategy. I'd love to leave here having an idea of who's taking charge and
Well, let's
what
get
the next
Sarah's
step.
response to this idea. Could the EDC develop a strategy for this sector?
Yes. I think that
What do you?
I'd like to continue with the food piece, the
Yeah.
food processing
Oh,
piece,
absolutely,
and get
yeah.
more
Got a
information
lot of
from that,
momentum there.
and then certainly build on that. I think we have not, and I think with the food processing piece also, this is the first time that we've kind of taken on this strategy thing that we won't necessarily implement by ourselves, but instead we're doing the strategy for the whole county.
Right.
And I think that that's an important thing that we can do and keep doing. So yes.
Uh-huh.
And then is MoCo made part of that? Part of that strategy, because you had mentioned in your earlier remark, I'm just curious of, I think you said somebody needs to really capitalize on that brand, and I would agree with that, but I guess the question is that somebody EDC, or are you suggesting that somebody is somebody else? Is that going to be
I think we need
part
to
of
think
this
through it more fully.
broader strategy?
When it was done, it was kind of at the very beginning, and it was kind of piecemeal, and we need to think through that more fully.
So I'm inclined to say we ought to pursue this idea of a council that would be a sounding board for a strategy development process as well. It's bringing the players together to start working on this. And then we ought to hear from the EDC as to what it would take to develop a strategy and what the timeline is and how you might do that, resources, so on. And then everybody should write down what they thought were the top elements of that, and we'll return to that, as we talk through that next step. And we'll go off and we'll start writing. All right. Think we're done? Good conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.